Awesome. Well, Yogi, on that note, one, I appreciate you joining me on the podcast. For those who are listening, we've attempted to record this, I don't know, 5 or 6 times. So we're finally here. We're making it happen. So thanks for joining me on the podcast. Before we get rolling, will you tell everyone just a little bit about who you are, where you're from, and what you're doing today?
Well, my name's Yogi Dorelis. Yonel is my first name. Yogi's my call sign. There's a great story behind that because I managed to orchestrate my own call sign throughout my career. Once I realized you usually get your call sign for doing something stupid, but that's another story. I'm sure you can tell I was born and raised in New York City. Grew up in Manhattan. Rode the subway to school every day. I mean, didn't own a car till I was 24. Yeah, I mean, I grew up in as urban environment as you can get.
That's kind of like Georgia, just different.
Well, I spent 3.5 years in Valdosta, man, so I get it.
Yeah, you understand then the dichotomy here.
Yeah. So I grew up, don't come from a military family. Uncle served in World War II, had an older cousin who served in Vietnam. But don't come from a military family at all, but was attracted to it. Oh man, I mean, I'm one of these guys, everyone who knows me, reconnecting with people from high school so everyone remembers me drawing airplanes in school and just the military I mean, honestly, I saw the sands of Iwo Jima as a kid and I'm like, I'm going to be a Marine, and I kind of was focused on that from as far back as I could remember. Like I said, no real strong military background in my family. Matter of fact, grew up with a single worker mom. She was a typical Jewish mother, probably wanted a doctor or a lawyer. And I shut that down early. That wasn't going to happen. And I'm sure she hoped I'd grow out of it, but I never did. Was really focused on being a Marine officer. That was really the goal for me, to be a Marine officer and Marine aviator. Unfortunately, I didn't correlate being an officer and being a good kid. I was not a good kid. I was I straddled the line between good and bad. And when I got to college and walked in the officer selection office in New York, there was a colonel there, a Mustang, who basically told me, come back in a year, because right now I would not consider you appropriate candidate for this program. He sat me down. He explained to me I didn't present well. Both, in the way I dressed and just my attitude. I was a little, he was a street guy made good, so he was pretty straightforward. He said, you're presenting right now as a guy who hangs out on the corner, on the stoop, and which wasn't too far off the truth. But I mean, and he said, if you really want this, learn how to interview, learn how to, work on diction, vocabulary, those kind of things, and come back and see me in a year. And I guess he figured, hey, if the guy wants it, he'll be back in a year. And I showed up back in a year, a different person, ready, a more serious college student, more serious about everything. And I was accepted into the officer program. So I don't know how many Marine aviators you've had on. I know Brian had some on. The path to being a Marine officer, obviously the academy, ROTC, but the Marine Corps has a unique thing called a Platoon Leaders Class program, which provides college students opportunity to go to officer candidate school while they're in college, then come back and be in an inactive reserve status, collect some money, and then you get your commission when you graduate. Now, they offer two options. You can do it 2 summers in a row or 1 10-week. I have since learned that the smart thing to do is go to the 1 10-week. I chose the other option because, again, in my not yet developed mind, I was like, okay, I can still salvage some of my summer. I can go out to the beach and hang out with my friends in the Hamptons or whatever. But dumbest, stupidest, most idiotic decision among many of my idiotic decisions, because basically it's going to Marine boot camp twice. So you go down there, you do the first 6 weeks, you come back, and a year later, you have to make the choice to go again. Now, from the particular officer selection office I came from, 6 of us started. That second summer, only 2 of us went back.
Yeah, it's a little bit
right?
tougher to like rip the Band-Aid off a second time, I would imagine.
Yeah, no, I literally remember being on the back of my friend's motorcycle. We were taking a ride around the city. We stopped at a light. It was the day before I was supposed to go back, and I just leaned over and threw up because the idea of going back was horrifying to me. But I talked so much crap about being a Marine that I painted myself into a corner. I couldn't quit, you know? So I went back, and again, it's just the same thing. Get off the bus, screaming, yelling, the same silly things where you empty your duffel bag and hold up every item of gear. And when the guy holds it up in the wrong hand, you all suffer and do bends and thrusts in the Virginia, the hot Northern Virginia humid summer till you puke. Anyway, I've since advised several people who became Marine officers, and the first thing I do is tell them go to the 10-week program. Don't do the 2 6 weeks. It's just don't do it.
Just get it knocked out. Was there anything you really had to overcome to get into the Marines? So you said you got into some trouble as a kid. Was it significant trouble, or was it just like, hey, you need an attitude readjustment, spend a year?
It wasn't significant. Now, I will admit I've done some things. Had I been caught, it would have changed the trajectory of my life,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, no doubt.
God looks out for idiots. I believe in God, and he, for some reason, I'm sitting here talking to you after a life of crazy experiences. He somehow decided I got to look out for this moron, so, but the military and the Marine Corps was exactly what I needed because I was a bit of a spoiled. My mom indulged me. My older brother was 11 years older and left the house early, and I was a little spoiled, a little selfish, a little soft, even though I thought I was a tough guy.
Yeah.
And everything the Marine Corps did, I needed. And I learned that if I really was going to be a leader, I was around. This was 81. All the drill instructors had been to Vietnam. Most of the senior NCOs had all been in Vietnam, and I realized, like, this is not a joke. I'm not cut out for this per se, like a lot of the guys who showed up. And I can't explain it. I decided this is what I want. I have to do it. It wasn't easy. I was, they tell you to be the gray man. I couldn't be the gray man if I tried. So I used to think my name was Just Begin because they would just walk up to me and go, just begin. And I would be doing bends and thrusts. It was the greatest experience, but the toughest experience of my life. And the farther I get away from it, the more I realize what a transformative and great thing it was for me. You know what I mean? I will owe the Marine Corps any success I have in life. What little modicum of success I've had will be because of the things I learned, the principles, values, and things I learned in the Marine Corps. And I say that, as cliche as it sounds, 100% convinced of it.
No, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, it completely changed your trajectory and put you on the path you're on today. It sounds like it could have been a very different path. And talking to young people, I'm the same way. Like I did some dumb stuff that, it could have gone south, and the trajectory I've been on would have been completely different. So someone's watching out for me, and I'm
Yeah.
thankful and grateful and blessed because of that. The unfortunate piece that young people don't realize today, or not all young people realize, is especially going to the military, one or two dumb decisions can have ramifications that impact their entire life. And even in today's culture is even worse. There's 10 cell phones all recording what you're doing, and you're one step away from being on YouTube or plastered being the next viral thing.
Yeah.
And not
No, you're 100% correct. And I mean, you know, I'm just grateful, that I kind of had that goal where I knew, okay, there's certain lines I can't cross. You know what I mean? And I'm kind of glad that kept me, but I did. I don't want to mention them here because they're frankly embarrassing and things I'm ashamed of. But there were things that, would have changed. They would have put me in jail, pure and simple. And I don't regret my upbringing. I'm glad I had the upbringing I did. I'm glad I kind of, seen the things I did and was exposed to things I was. I think that helped me in a lot of ways as an officer and as in the military, believe it or not. But yeah, I mean, I don't, like I said, I mean, now that like I said, it sounds cliche and dopey, but man, the man upstairs has looked out for me. I don't know why, but he did. But yeah, the Marine Corps was great. And unfortunately, my timing, I just have the worst timing in the world. So I got my commission and went to TBS. Every new lieutenant goes to TBS. It's basically a 6-month infantry officers course at the platoon level. You're basically trained in small unit tactics at the platoon level. You're a company of lieutenants led by captains who've been out in the fleet and some NCOs to assist. And you all get the various leadership positions and the various problems, as well as, you learn some of the administrivia involved in being a Marine officer. You learn about fitness reports and enlisted reports, and you get a whole book on etiquette and how to present, how to present yourself at social functions and what fork to use, believe it or not. But after that, I was on an air contract, so I was slated to go to flight school. Well, at the end of TBS, they used to have something called the 3-day war, where it was a basic 3-day field exercise. And we got back from the 3-day war and they called us into the auditorium, and I'm paraphrasing, but they said, "Sucks to be you guys. We've got too many aviators at both ends of the pipeline. So nobody's going to flight school, at least for 18 to 24 months. They gave us several options. One was if you dropped your air contract, they'd give you any MOS you wanted, regardless of your class standing. And then those of us who wanted to stick it out and wait for the air contract, they stick us where they wanted us for 18. Like I had orders to the 7th Truck Battalion in Camp Pendleton, California.
Good thing every Marine's a rifleman first.
Right. So
find something.
But one of the kids in my class, his father was a admiral at NAVAIR. Now, NAVAIR basically oversees naval aviation. So it includes the Marine Corps, the Coast Guard, and the Navy. So this guy walked over to his Marine counterpart, said, "What's going on?" They explained it, and he was like, "Well, we're kind of short pilots. Do you think the Marine Corps will let a couple of guys swap to the Navy?" And the Marine Corps being the Marine Corps, and I get this, they're like, "You might get a couple of guys. Sure, give it a shot." So these Navy 06s show up and they say, "If you're willing to do this, we'll make it happen. And you'll go down to Pensacola next week. We'll update your physicals. And then if that works out, we'll swap you to the Navy." So there was 4 companies at TBS that were kind of at various stages of TBS that disaffected. Now I was done. So I was like, okay, I have nothing more to prove in the Marine Corps. This sounds like a good idea, but I drank the Marine Corps Kool-Aid, so I was really struggling with it, right? The captains called student platoon commanders come in, and they get a chance to talk to us. Now, in my company, there was 2 infantry officers and 2 aviators who ran, each captain ran one of the 4 platoons in the student company, right? So the first infantry officer, he's a Mustang. This guy is out of a mold. He looks like a Cro-Magnon man, jaw out to here, arms bustling out of his rolled up sleeves, former enlisted infantry guy, central casting right off the bat.
Hardened.
I'd rather dig ditches in the Marine Corps than fly jets in the Navy. If any of you guys do this, you're traitors. I don't want anything to do with you. He walks out, right? The other infantry officer, much more, I think he went to Harvard or something, much more mild-mannered, hard guy, but just different, kind of the nerd assassin type, He's like, "You guys got to do what's best for you. Whatever you do, I respect it. Good luck. You guys have busted your ass here. You deserve to get what you want. I'd love for you to stay in the Marine Corps, but good luck." He walks out. The 2 aviators come up together and they go, "We will deny this in public, but if you guys don't take this deal, you're stupid." And they walk out. So that kind of cemented it for me. Yep. And I took a few weeks, months for the paperwork to come through. I got to be in charge of the headquarters platoon part of the time and that was made up of all the Marines who were in trouble were waiting, pop positive. So it was great for me because these guys would salute me with their left. So it was a good little leadership course for me. And then one day, got my DD 214 from the Marine Corps, sidestepped 1 foot, one sidestep, swore into the Navy as an ensign, and was in flight school about a week and a half later.
It's wild to me that the Marines fall under the Department of the Navy, yet you had to get separated from the Marine Corps in order to.
Yeah, I mean, it's a different branch of the service. I mean, just like the Space Force is now a separate branch of the service under Department of the Air Force, but I mean, it was a win for the Navy because they have trained officers, right?
Yep.
Trained plus, because now, obviously we're probably a little more squared away than your average naval officer. And, it met their requirement. And for me, it was just growing my hair out a little bit and putting on a different uniform. So it worked out. Pensacola, I'm sure you've been there. I mean, it was a stressful, tough year, mainly because you're fighting the temptation to have too good a time. You have to, again, it was another place where I learned to buckle down. And so, if I wanted to get through, because I wasn't academically gifted, nor was I particularly gifted in the aircraft, that I was going to have to take it a little seriously. I found that I was not a natural pilot, even though I had 40 hours of, because I went to Embry-Riddle for a semester and flunked out, but that's a whole different story. But I got 40 hours of 172 time. I found out that didn't help me much in the T-34. I got a little air sick during acro, so that was a little bit but I just buckled down, and I knew I just was always fascinated with helicopters. I got to be honest. I never was like, I got to be a fighter pilot or nothing. Like, I know a guy who quit flight school because he did not get jets. In the Navy, when you get done with primary, you track either jets, helos, props, right? It's probably changed some now with the different aircraft, but then it was, you tracked fighters, you tracked helos, or you tracked props, which was going to be either P3s or C-130s, right? This guy didn't get jets, he quit, which I think is the craziest thing to me. Like, he literally was like, if I can't fly fighters, I don't want to be a pilot, which I remember the first day we got to flight school, the Admiral said, I wish I was where you guys were. 2 things I remember. He goes, I wish I was where you guys were. And 2, you will be happy no matter what you fly. Work hard, pursue your goals. But if it doesn't work out, you will be happy no matter what you fly, And, but I ended up, I just finally said, I want to be a helicopter pilot. So when it came time to put our dream sheet, I put helos.
Did you want that, like, knowing going into pilot training, or is that something as you learn more in pilot training that you figured, hey, I want to go fly helos because of the mission, or is it just the fact that those things are just shaking themselves apart that really attracted you?
I was fascinated. I was fascinated with Hueys from Vietnam and all the footage, and I had met a guy who flew Hueys in Vietnam, and the guy was just cool, man. He was just a cool dude, I'd met him in Hawaii. He was kind of like a laid-back dude who was an older guy getting high, but he had just flown, 2 tours in Hueys, and I just thought he was a cool dude, And but we got to take fam rides in the helos, not up front, but in the back. And I don't know. I was just like, yeah, I like this, man. And I'm sorry to backtrack. While I was in college, I saved up money to take a helo lesson in an old Bell 47, the kind of helos you saw in MASH.
Yep.
Well, we crashed. He was showing me other rotations, and he crashed the helicopter. And we walked away, and I didn't get hurt. Now, ignorance is bliss. It could have turned out a lot worse, but
it usually does in those cases.
His buffoonery was not the ultimate buffoon. So I came away going, well, shit, you can crash in a helicopter and walk away. This is pretty cool. I think I want to fly these. So
you have to be wired slightly different.
Yeah. So, I picked helos. I don't regret it. I loved them from the minute I got in one. I did think I would never graduate flight school the first time I got in it, and he gave me the controls. And I remember, first of all, he has one finger on the cyclic showing me how to hold a hover, right? And he goes, I'll give you the pedals first. The way they do it, I'll give you the pedals first, then I'll give you the collective, then they'll give you the cyclic. I remember just before he gave me the cyclic, he goes, keep it in Florida. And then once he gave it to me, it was just, a wild ride. And I went home that night and I almost cried because I'm like, I'm never going to get this. I screwed up. I should have went props or something because I'm never going to get this. I'm going to fail out of flight school. I'm going to be on a ship in the Indian Ocean in a month. I was just horrified, but it worked out, and one day I could hover, like the light bulb comes on and you can hover and you can do all this stuff. And it's like, then you're like, wow, this is the greatest thing ever. And I like the low to the ground sensation. I just fell in love with it. I loved it. And, I love watching you guys zoom around. I love when you guys come help us out and drop bombs and shoot guns. But I'm just like, I like the fact that if something bad happens, I can hopefully land this thing and run away.
That is kind of the nice thing. I always wondered, like, if you're on an instrument approach and the weather's bad, you're like, well, I'm at Men's. If you can just hover versus.
No, see, that's everyone always asks that. No, we're doing it just like you. Like if I hover in IMC, unless I have a coupled hover system, it's spatial D plus a million. You know what I mean? I mean, one of the biggest dangers are brownouts. If you see these brownout landings, I mean, because if you can't spot that drift, that lateral drift, that's what gets you in trouble. So yeah, no, and we're the only advantage we have over you is I can do an approach. If I really wanted to, I could fly an approach at 60 knots. We generally fly them at 90, 90, but that's the only advantage I have is as I get close to Mins, I can slow down so that if I break out and I'm close to the ground, I'm not going to do some high yucca maneuver, but we still have to fly an approach just like a regular airplane, and I think that's good. But you're like the thousand fixed wing guys ask me that. Can't you guys just hover down? I'm like, no.
Easy. I just can't see the runway. I'm just going to hover here for a minute and wait for the weather to be better.
Some of the new aircraft have a coupled system, just like in the airliners you fly, like, so they can bring you down to like 10 feet in a hover. And I have yet to fly. I'm aging out of that stuff, but I flew, to the boat at night, just sweat pouring off, just going, this is crazy. Why'd I pick this for, hoping the ship will pop out of the blackness. And I flew in the Navy before goggles. So when you're out at sea, basically, I tell people, you want to know what it's like to fly at night over the ocean, just go in your closet and shut the door. That's it.
Yeah, I can attest. I've told a story on a couple podcasts where I was being interviewed and it was flying over the ocean, doing some practice dive glides, which we did one round of it and realized this is dumb because we can't tell what are boats and what are stars. And that's when we had goggles and we had like I would say a decent moon, but we definitely had starlight so you could see out there. I can't imagine doing that with no illumination out there. It sounds insane. And throw some high seas or something like that, just make it sporty. Nope.
When the ocean is smooth and it's is almost worse because the starlight reflects off the ocean, so you can't tell if the stars are like, it looks like a mirror. It's crazy.
I'm good.
That's kind of like why I'm pretty proud of my gold wings, you know what I mean? And that's why the Navy guys swagger a little more, is because it's sometimes you're out there and you're like, this is absolutely retarded. I should have been an accountant, but you just do it, because you got no choice. The boat is the only game in town.
I'll throw this out there. They could use a runway that's fixed to land. That's another option out there.
True, but you can't take that runway and sail it off the coast of bad guy land and make them understand that right off that coast there's enough firepower to turn their country into a parking lot.
I'm trying to think. Maybe it's an MH-53. I know you've probably seen the video. I think it's laying on the back of a destroyer. It's laying on the back of some kind of boat. But like
the one that flips over.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a 46. Yeah. I flew 53s in the Navy. So I flew CH-53Es, which is huge. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that can catch you out there. But honestly, I mean, flying in the Air Force, aviation as a whole is just a inherently dangerous profession. And the kind of flying you do in the military, as you well know, as an airline guy, it's completely different than civilian flying. And, you are hanging it out there. They do the best they can to mitigate the risk, but we're asked to do a job that involves significant risk. And you learn, I mean, look at look at getting gas at night off the tanker. You
Right.
do it, I do it, right? Think about it. It's routine, like you said, it's routine to us. But when you look under the goggle, like at times I'd be flying in the mountains in Nevada and I'd look under the goggles and I go, this is insane. It's cool, but it's insane. Like, think about going to the tanker at night.
I like tanker at night and you are in the weather and you're
I
reading, I mean,
trying to rendezvous with the tanker at night in some skosh weather. I mean, but it was routine. You didn't think about it. You just go, okay, we'll do this, we'll do that. And you're sweating a little bit when you're flying, but to the average person, it's madness. And, you take the average GA pilot and talk to him, even a guy who's been flying a while, and just tell him the stuff you've done. And, it's going to think about just aerial refueling in general.
right.
It's kind of crazy that we've come up with a way to pass jet fuel from another flying object to another flying object.
Yeah, but it's like you said, all I care about is the time, the point, and really the frequency. That's as detailed as you get as far as the brief goes, because you
right.
go out there and do it.
We'll be on this track, or if it's not a track, you give some coordinates, you work the times out. I mean, and when you were flying CAS in Afghanistan, you're cycling back and forth to the tanker to make sure you can stay on station for whatever troop. I mean, it becomes routine, but now that I don't do it anymore and I watch films of it, I'm like, one, I miss it, but I'm also like, that's kind of crazy. I'm flying this helicopter within 40 feet of this other aircraft, while taking on Jet A at 1,000 pounds a minute. And I got to stay on the tanker when he turns around, right?
Yep.
And try to stay on the hose. I've slain the drogue before. I've put the probe right. Everybody's going to do it, but but you got to stay on this tanker. So you're flying formation to try to stay on the hose and still get gas. I mean, it's nuts, but it was the best job. They paid us, man.
I was talking to my old boss just recently. So he was working with some engineers and talking about max performing the aircraft. And so this is specifically talking about the F-35 engine. And they've designed it right where you can go idle to max, and they're thinking maybe you do that once in every now and then. He's like, no, when I go out and fly BFM, I mean, that's 100 times in a sortie. I'm idle to max, idle to max, idle to max. Like, it is taking the aircraft all the way to its limits, because that's what you need to do when you go out there and fight. So you're asking a lot, and the margins of error that are the tolerance there is really small when it comes down to, if you go left or right just a little too far, it's going to be catastrophic.
I mean, even, with helicopters, and I mean, we have our weapons guys who go through it. We max perform the helicopter. I've done I've fought other helicopters, fought an F-16, what I mean? But, you're yanking this thing, the fuel, it's just this little linkage, I don't know. I mean, I think it's probably similar in the, I don't know if it's an electric or mechanical linkage in your jet, but, we have this little linkage that's going to the HMU, the fuel control, and you're just doing, and, especially if you're, you're doing NOE and you're trying to, we're at 100 feet, we're trying to use the terrain to mask us. And then, when you're dealing with an LZ and you're trying to come in and then you're getting shot at, you're just constantly performing this aircraft. I mean, the Air Force H-60s have these 308 beam cracks just because we beat the crap out of them especially since the war, for 20 plus years. And they keep getting reinforced, and thankfully the new aircraft will be online soon but yeah, I mean, everything we do is to a limit. And when you compare it to civilian flying, like the flying I do, it doesn't even come close. Everybody's like, oh, you're an air ambulance pilot. That sounds so cool, and it's a great job. But in essence, I just take off. Sometimes I land in the desert or on a highway, and I land on a hospital pad, and I don't maneuver the aircraft, like I used to. I don't, just like you. I mean, it's completely different. It's completely different, and it is. You learn some good stuff.
Yeah, no doubt. And so I don't want to jump too far ahead because I want to talk about the air ambulance, what you're doing now, but you go into the Navy and you're flying MH-53s. You do that for a little bit.
7.
All right, 7 years, and then transition into the Army, correct?
Yeah. So I got out. I was a moron, and I thought, I had my second kid, and I didn't want to be gone, and yada yada. The Gulf War had ended, and I was like, you know what? I think I want to do the corporate thing. All my buddies were seeing these headhunters and getting jobs, and I got a job back in New York for Airborne Express in a management capacity. I literally knew in a week I'd made the biggest mistake. And I literally went back to the Navy and said, can I come back? And they were like, too bad, so sad. So I just shotgun my paperwork out. New York has a bunch of aviation reserve units from all the services around. The Army Guard just got back to me the quickest. I became an Army warrant officer, flew in Huey's, was a W-2, was a great unit. A good percentage of guys had flown in Vietnam. They were cops, firemen, lawyers, doctors, and it was really a flying club. We didn't do anything tactical. The Huey was on the way out as a platform, as a viable platform. They were starting to get Hawks in the unit. So it was great. Like, you'd show up for a drill weekend, and the lieutenant would brief the mission. He'd say, I want you guys to go do this, this, and this. And he'd walk out, and the W-3 would go, we're not doing that. We're going down to Atlantic City. I know a Chinese place down there. We'll do some low level on the ocean. And we go down and we take a 4-ship to Atlantic City, eat in the all-you-can-eat Chinese buffet, or something that this W-3 had liked, and we'd fly back. And it was just these guys were great. They were great pilots. I learned a lot from them. All of them been like, a lot of the guys in Vietnam would they talk to each other about their stories, and you just sit there and go, what? You were shot down and you went back and got another helicopter? And and I'm like, and they were these, a lot of them became cops and firemen, I think, because of the adrenaline, but they were nice guys, they were just good. But you'd listen to them, and as a younger guy, I'd be like, what? That's crazy to me, and it was just fun. And then about 4.5 years into that, an opening at the 102nd Rescue Group, the Air Guard unit out on Long Island of Perfect Storm fame, an opening came there. And I took a shot, got accepted, was in the unit, they started doing in-house training for me in the HH-60, and then a slot at Kirtland came available. They said, do you want to go? And I'm like, yeah. So I and in between that, I had left the Airborne Express job, and my buddy had been working in the box office on Broadway in ticket sales, which is a really good job. Like, it's a union job, like one of those old school union jobs. You got to know someone to get in. And it sounds like, oh, you're selling tickets, you're making good dough. It's a great gig. And he got me that job, and I'd been working that. And I was at Kirtland. I took a leave of absence. I was at Kirtland, and about a month into it, the assignments guy for Helos showed up, and all the active duty guys were saying, hey man, we're hurting for pilots. You should ask if they'll let you come on active duty. So I just kind of cornered the guy in the hallway and was like, hey, I'm Yogi Dorelis. I'm from the 106 Rescue on Long Island, the Guard unit. Can I come on active duty? And he's like, did they pay for you to go to flight school? I'm like, no. I said, I came in as a cell res. Here's my background. He goes, yeah, put in a request. If they approve it, I'll bring you on for 2 years. So I did that. Got my 2-year orders, assigned to Nellis Air Force Base, and 2 things happened that were interesting. I found out, because of my time in aviation counted, my Navy time and Army time, I was eligible for the bonus. And I had my first promotion board to major within 4 months of my coming over to the Air Force. Hadn't been to SOS, hadn't done any of the Air Force pedigree stuff, none.
Yeah.
So tried to get it done I got it done by correspondence, but this is 98. So completely different environment so I got passed over. So now I'm like, oh man, and everybody's like, oh, this is a big problem now, and I'm like, well, why is it a big problem? I don't care. I honestly, I mean, I wasn't thinking long range, and I was like, I don't care. I don't mind being a captain. It doesn't bother me, and
Helicopters.
yeah, I mean, and they're like, well, I don't think you'll make major, and that means you might not be able to stay till 20. And then literally a month later, they came out with this thing, we'll retain captains to 20, sign this. So I signed it. I'm like, okay, I resigned myself that I was going to be a captain. And honestly, I looked at it as a good deal because I'm like, well, if I don't have to worry about promotion, I can pretty much say what I want, do what I want. I mean, I can, and then the war happened. I was at Nellis. I did a bunch of ONW, OSW stuff, which was really cool. I really enjoyed both of those operations, especially the Turkey.
Southern Watch, yeah.
Yeah, Northern and Southern Watch. It was really good. And we thought it was like combat. We were getting combat pay and we were flying around Turkey and the PKK and the Turk. Like we would sit alert in Sirnak, which is north of the Iraqi border. And while the vol was going on, because they had the vol then, the vol was like from 600 to 1500. It was like a war on the clock.
Gentlemen like.
Yeah, and we would sit at this Turkish base, Sirnak, but their aircraft were taking off and shooting up the PKK like in the same valley. Like we'd be drinking tea with the Cobra pilots. They'd launch on a mission, come back, shot. Our PJs would help them. With that, I mean. It was crazy. And, but it was really good experience. And 11 happens, which was very surreal for me because I worked in the World Trade Center on 2 separate occasions. My brother was a commodities trader. He survived both World Trade Center bombings, the one in 93 and 9/11. My wife had surgery, so I was taking some leave. I wake up that morning, I turn on the news, like anyone else, I'm like, it's clear blue in a million. How did a plane hit the World Trade Center? I'm like, this is ridiculous. And they're like, it's a Cessna. I'm like, that's a lot of fire for a Cessna, Yeah. And then as I'm watching it, here comes the other airplane. Boom. So I'm like, okay, well, obviously something's not kosher,
Yep.
I head into work. I tell my wife, I think I need to go to work. I said, I just got a feeling I need to go into work. Takes me 3 hours to get on the base. While I'm in this traffic jam to get on the base, the towers collapse. So I go, oh, well, I think my brother's dead. I'm like, I'll have to figure, how your mind works, like you're almost on autopilot. I'm like, I'll have to figure out a way to tell my mom later, but now I need to get on base and figure out what's going on.
Yeah, mission focused. And I mean,
yeah. And he calls, luckily, he calls my house about an hour later. So I know he's okay. I knew my mom wasn't there. She has no reason to go down to the World Trade Center at 9 a.m. So I figured the odds are she's good. And then the rest of the day was like, I know it sounds crazy, but I'm one of the first 3 guys in the building. The commander isn't there yet. Wing commander calls like, hey, this is Captain Dorelis. Hey, sir, what's going on? He knows who I am. He's like, is the commander? I'm like, no, sir, I'm it. He's like, okay, I want 2 aircraft fully armed and fueled, ready to go. I'm like, okay. And I'm like, someone go get maintenance, get the maintenance chief. Luckily, about 2 minutes later, the commander came in and took over all that. And we flew a couple of patrols around the base to make sure. And then they came up. There was some harebrained brief we went to. I'll never forget it. They said they had intel that a van was going to blow up the Hoover Dam. And they ID'd the van, and this is just at the beginning of the when UAVs were being used a lot. So I'm going, how did they ID the van? And then they have this cockamamie idea. They literally briefed this to us. The A-10s, that they were going to ID the van with the UAVs. The A-10s were going to strafe the van, and then we were going to infill the security forces to do what had to be done. And I remember looking over at my buddy. I'm like, this is just a bad idea. I said, I just really hope this doesn't happen. I said, because we're going to shoot somebody, some mom and her kids coming back from grandma's house or something. I said, how many white, luckily it was just a bunch of, it was literally the day, 2 days after, it was in that flurry of bad info. And thankfully no one ever did that, but that's how crazy it was. And then our bosses, my commander and DO, who came from the special ops community, they got us in the war. They were on the phone nonstop to get us in the war. And my first detachment left in November of 2001 for Pakistan, and my first deployment followed shortly after the new year.
Yeah, I would say you received a Distinguished Flying Cross. I got the citation here. And let's see, March 3rd, 2002. So
19 years ago, man.
Yeah, how about that? To the day. So that's kind of it's a small world. Maybe there's a reason why we postponed this so many times. Yeah, March 3rd, 2002. Operation Anaconda. I mean, that was in the throes and the early we're trying to find bin Laden there. So can you talk to me a little bit about that day? What was going on? You again, the Distinguished Flying Cross with the Combat V. So you guys are flying around some really challenging terrain, especially thinking about a helicopter, because altitude obviously not your friend. You're getting shot at, and a lot is going on. So this is a really complex operation.
Afghanistan, for me, there may be some other folks, guys who've flown to Everest or something, but I found Afghanistan to be probably the most challenging environment for a helicopter, because mountains, high altitude, dust, pretty much everything that's not a friend of a helicopter is going on over there.
Yeah, so bullets and RPGs.
That's before we even get into that. And so Anaconda happens. We're really no one knew who we were. Like when we showed up at Kandahar, they're like, who the hell are you guys? We're supposedly, everybody knows we're coming. We show up, the Army, the Marines had just turned it over to the 101st. The Army's like, who the F are you? And we tell them, they're like, we got medevac. What do we need you guys for? It just, no one knew who we were. We weren't in the planning because we were an ACC asset. So we weren't attached to the SOF portion of it, but our bosses knew all the SOF guys, right? So they were very helpful us getting our base set up, getting our op set up at Kandahar. I was put in charge of setting up our op at Kandahar, and getting us, I had us ready to launch in 3 days. And even before Anaconda happened, we got launched on a medevac. Some Australians had driven into a minefield and got blown up by an anti-vehicle mine. Our first launch, because our TOC was linked to the Army TOC by an old field phone, those old wires, that line got cut by a vehicle or something. Our first launch was literally an Army sergeant ran to our TOC about a half mile, out of breath, gave us a piece of paper with some coordinates and said, you guys got to launch. That was our first launch in Afghanistan, like that. And then we successfully prosecuted that mission. Then Anaconda happened, and what had happened prior to Anaconda was the Army had crashed a few birds, and this is no slam on them at all. It was low loom, dust. It was horrible. And you had guys with limited experience in that environment. And so they had some accidents. And so they were really nervous. They were worried about how they were going to be able to employ those assets in the environment. And then Anaconda happened, and just things started going to shit right away. I mean, there's no other way to put it, and we got launched up to a FARP Texaco, which became famous in the battle over there, because of where it was. And we were just waiting around all day. And interestingly enough, I was walking back from talking to some PJs back to my helo, and the helo started going like this. And I'm like, man, I need to drink some water. I'm dehydrated. Finally, somebody screamed earthquake. Like in the middle of that, there was like a 7-point-something earthquake.
That's very Afghanistan.
Yeah. And so I guess to just make it short and sweet, there had been some wounded folks, and they couldn't get to them all day. The Apaches were getting shot off the LZ, all the aircraft, and they were coming at the FARP, and I was seeing all these shot up aircraft, and I was just agitating me because I'm just going, man, if a bullet can do that to that piece of metal, what's it going to do to me? And the whole reality of like, wow, this is a little real. And we were getting ready to fly back to Kandahar, which was about an hour and a half flight south, right? And then all of a sudden, we get a call on the radio saying, hey, those guys are still there. No one's been able to get to them. Are you guys willing to try? So we go, yeah, we'll give it a shot. My flight lead, Tom Cahill, who got the Silver Star that day, it's kind of funny. He calls us together and he goes, hey, guys, I'm just letting you know, if we do this, there's a good chance we're going to get effed up. Does anybody have a problem with that? So I'm going, well, yeah, I kind of do, but I'm not going to say anything, right? And the PJs being PJs are like, no, let's go right now, so I'm like, oh man. So we get in, my mouth is dry, everything. And it just was a crazy night. Like, we're talking to the KAOC, which was in PSAB, right? Which unfortunately was our launch authority, which is, now that I'm retired 10 years, I'll say that's the dumbest idea ever, to tie it to that higher headquarters for us to launch. And it did cost some lives down the road later, I think, but they're passing intel to us that we've passed to them, that we got from local. We're getting it from the local SOF, we're getting fed we're in the top getting fed by the SOF guys, the 10th Mountain guys. So we're going, hey, this is what's going on. We send it to them, they're sending it to us. Then we're talking to a JTAC, which we don't know this, but he's not co-located with the people we're trying to find. He's in the TOC talking via radio to the people we're trying to find. But we don't know this, right?
Yeah.
So it just was your typical cluster.
It's the telephone game on steroids under immense amounts of pressure and stress.
And there's just a lot going on. Like, we get to the area that the conventional forces are engaged, so, and everybody had those, remember those little triangle lights guys would just hang on it. Everybody had those. Yeah. And there's just shooting, and we're trying to, and guys are, doing, they got the chem light on the string. It's just all kinds of confusing, conflicting information, as you can imagine. I'm sure you've been there 100 times, right? But this is our first time out in this, and so we land in the 1LZ, and they start shooting and mortaring us, and no one's there. So we're like, okay, this obviously isn't the right place. We leave. This is kind of funny, but sad at the same time. We land in another LZ, and 3 soldiers jump on the aircraft, right? And all of a sudden the PJ comes on, he goes, hey, sir, these guys aren't wounded, right? And I'm like, what do you mean? He goes, no, these aren't the guys. They think we're here to exfil them. So I'm like, well, they got to go. They got to go. So you remember the scene in Apocalypse Now, where the guy's like, I'm not going. Well, it was like that. Like, our PJs have to manhandle these poor guys off the aircraft so we can continue looking for the actual wounded folks we're looking for. And we take off, we dump those guys. I'm like, man, I feel horrible, but we just couldn't take them. We hit bingo fuel now, and we're like, well, we can't leave. We're not going to leave. So we're like, F bingo. We'll figure something out. We'll land there, some friendlies or something.
Make it happen. We
keep going. 2 spots him. So he goes in, he lands, gets the wounded out. We have whole blood on our aircraft. So we have to land, put the whole blood, the PJs transfer the whole blood. And I think one other PJ goes to the other aircraft. We get these 3 guys out, they're shooting RPGs, it's just a blur. Like, I remember seeing tracers, and I'm just like, do I owe these guys money? Like, why are they shooting at me? What'd I do to them? I just want to come in and get this guy out. And we get these guys out, and we land at the FARP, I think was 7 minutes of gas is what we calculated we had left. I mean, but here's the thing. I'm very proud of what we did, and I'm obviously humbled and proud to receive that award, but that was the beginning of the war, right? So that was a big deal. But in the context of combat search and rescue and the community I come from, those kind of missions happened routinely after that, routinely.
Yep.
So it seems like a big deal, but if I read the citations from some of my friends or the things I've witnessed or seen subsequent to that on my other deployments, it was just routine. I mean, we lived up to the legacy left by the Vietnam guys. And I also think we were victims of our own success because we pull off a couple of rough missions. We had a FLIR that the Army guys, except for the 160th. And so we would get called out on missions when the weather was shitty. We didn't have a Red Cross, so we could shoot back. So anytime it was very challenging or very scary, they would ask us to do it. And again, the Army guys, the Army medevac guys need wheelbarrows as much as anybody. And I've seen them and they will do anything. A lot of times their bosses won't let them do it because of the risk, right? It wasn't because of their will. I want to be very clear about that. Like, those guys are heroes and they're as ballsy as anybody. But sometimes because we had guns or we had FLIR, they'd, get the Air Force guys to do it. And the PJs are just, again, I mean, we could do stuff that they couldn't. Like, we had the jaws of life. We had sometimes diving gear that the other guys, so we just had some capabilities that the regular Army medevac guys didn't have. So we would do a lot of crazy stuff, but listen, I was along for the ride on that. I mean, I was just basically navigating. I got to fly a little bit. Tom Cahill, who unfortunately we lost to his demons a few years ago, was an amazing job. And the reason I'm talking to you, I mean, we had some, we drooped rotor at 10,000 feet, had to fly down the mountain to get flying again so we didn't crash. I mean, some incredible flying skills that night, and he's a former 160th guy before he transferred to the Air Force. I mean, just incredible stuff that there's no doubt a lesser pilot, we would have crashed. I was definitely, a couple of times that night, I was convinced, I'm like, well, this is where it ends in the mountains of Afghanistan here. I'm like, it doesn't look good. I'm not going to lie. Like, there was one or two times where I'm like, we're going to crash. I figured we'd crash. I didn't know what would happen after that. But, if it wasn't for him, he kept us out of some really, and he had already crashed in the Hindu Kush once about a month earlier,
Yeah. Well, you're humble to say that and downplay this, but in the end, it's a very heroic act. And I know there's 1,000 other stories. Like you said, like, this became such a routine thing, right? The unfortunate piece is, there are a lot of stories out of Afghanistan and Iraq. And that was one reason of starting this podcast, right? Is to capture these, what we would consider everyday stories, right? Or I was just doing my job. But I think it's important to capture that and tell that story, because it'll get lost in time otherwise. And, it's life and death. You're like, I'm going to die in Afghanistan tonight, which probably 5 years before that, you probably couldn't have found Afghanistan on the map. I wouldn't have found Afghanistan on the map before 2001.
To digress for a moment, like, for me, I'm man enough to admit, like, I wanted to know I wasn't going to be a coward in one of those things. I'll never tell you I'm a hero, but I definitely know I'm not a coward. I can look another warrior in the face and say, I've done my thing, and that was important to me. So to be able to do that, but then after you prove that, then the mission becomes everything. Your job, the legacy of the, kind of like the Marine Corps, you're the holder of a proud legacy previous. Well, in Air Force Combat Rescue, the Jolly Greens, the Pedros, that legacy. And then it's just, look, if we don't go, this guy's going to die. And you would go, who am I to say I'm too valuable or I'm not going to go when some guy's going to die? And I know in your case, I'm sure you've listened to the voices in a tick, when you hear that and you hear them talking, it's like, you gotta go, or some of the special operators, some bearded savage looks you in the eye and goes, hey, sir, if shit goes south, you're going to be there, right? You say, yeah, that's, that bond is you can't not go. You know what I mean? And so and I'm just proud. It's cliche, but I'm just so proud to have served with the people I served with. You know, the 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 caliber of people I got to serve with, especially in combat rescue, is just amazing to me. Like, there's countless acts of bravery that I witnessed myself, plus the anecdotal ones. Just the people I know, just the willingness. My buddy Aggie crashed, lost his leg, and he went back with a prosthetic leg and flew for a while. It just got to be a little too much pain, and he had to call it quits. But he went back and flew in combat with a prosthetic leg. I mean, what do you how do you quantify that? It's not. I mean, I don't know. And I know he's not the only one, but I'm saying, or just guys who. My buddy Keith, another guy, unfortunately we lost. He got 2 DFCs in a week. He landed and picked up wounded guys with an engine failure, went back and got another helicopter and went back, and I mean, in 2 DFCs in a week, I mean, that's, so I'm in awe. I am, even of the people I serve with, and I'm just happy to be in the same room with them and happy that I can, put on a Jolly patch or a Pedro patch and be part of the team, man. It just, and I don't want to digress from what we're talking about, but I mean, that's, like I said, you get older and further away from it, and the meaning of it and the pride and the exceptional people you realize you got to be around. And I know you feel the same way. It's just really amazing. And then when, you get back in the civilian world, and I'm not slamming civilians, that I meet wonderful people every day, different. As an actor, I'm just around different people, but they're great people, but I think back to people who are just willing to risk everything with minimal information and just doing it with a smile. I mean, that's the crazy thing is I think about how many times I laughed and smiled in situations where I was like, just as easily could have went south,
Right. It's humbling to be a part of it, right?
It is.
And you've nailed it. The organization, the group of people that you get to call your friends, your comrades. I don't think you'll find that anywhere else in the world. Maybe in the fire service or a police department, but it's to a certain degree. I don't think you'll find it outside of the military because the job is to go out there and hang it out. And at the end of the day, it's each other. That's what you're there for. And it's cliche to say, but I mean, I wholeheartedly agree. That bond is unique.
I'm willing to bet you felt this. Like, I remember coming back, we flew primarily at night. So we come back from a mission supporting. For a while, we followed the 160th and the tier 1 guys around when they did their hits in the busy part of Iraq, 6-7 time frame. You come back to Balad after a mission, and we'd land, and I'd be putting my gear in the truck, and the sun's coming up, and here come the 160th birds with all the shooters' legs hanging out, and they'd land, and they'd be taking a prisoner out, and the dog would be wagging its tail, and they'd fly by, and the little birds would fly by, and a couple of guys would wave at you. Then we had these Navy birds that were there doing their support. They'd land, and the sun's coming up, and I remember going, man, I don't think I'd want to be anywhere else in the world. Like, this is the greatest job a person could have. And people to this day go like, they don't understand, but I would literally go like, this is the greatest job in the world. And I know, like any pilot walking out to an aircraft when the sun's coming up early morning, just that turbine sound when you hit the start, I mean, and they're paying you and you're just like, I'm a lucky son of a, I mean, and I'm grateful and thankful. I consider my military service a privilege. And again, it's the most cliche thing and people roll their eyes. It was absolutely the privilege of my life to do this. And I just got to do it in a bunch of different uniforms, which is cool, but it was a privilege. And I only guys like me and you and the other guys understand that. And like you said, cops, fire. I have lots of friends who are in first responders, and it's the same thing. But a lot of people go, how is it a privilege? I'm like, it was a privilege, man. It was.
Yeah. For me, I know the mission aspect of it, I think I found like the most rewarding, right? And that's something I struggle with is it was no doubt my time in the military. Obviously, there's some exceptions to it, but especially like the deployment, the last deployment with doing OIR, it was a fighter squadron, a maintenance squadron. We were a group, so we didn't have a wing yet. So that's a little bit smaller for those who don't understand. And it was everyone there was purely focused on the mission. There wasn't all this BS that went along with it. As you go fight a war and a wing builds up,
Yeah.
all the frivolous stuff comes along with it. The random training that you don't need, the reflective belts that are the most important thing in the world.
Yeah.
All that.
I saw that from Afghanistan early when we were just like Wild West getting the job done to when Big Blue showed up. And
Yeah, it's a different world when Big Blue shows up, right? And that's the piece. Like I'll remember that because again, everyone there and everyone had a buy-in from the cops who were guarding the jets and the planes. Like they knew when we dropped, they knew when we were doing stuff. Everyone had buy-in and they were focused and they knew what their piece of the puzzle was and that they had to play
yes, sir.
part to make it happen. And if they didn't, the mission wouldn't happen. And when you get large enough as an organization, that's where I think we start failing because people start losing focus. I remember, as a seed guy, right? Suppression of enemy air defenses, as a fighter guy, you want to think you're tip of the spear. That's a support asset. You're there supporting, doing close air support. You're a support asset. You're there to help other people do their job. And
Yeah.
we lose focus really quickly on what the mission is or what the focus is.
You're preaching to the choir, Rain. I mean, I was a passed over major. Fine. That was my own, kind of doing because I wanted to stay flying. But my last few deployments as a passed over major were great because all I did was shield my guys from the BS. Like when I would hunt people down who bugged my guys in the chow hall. Like I would call their unit up. And I told one guy, I said, when you look in the mirror tonight, know that you're a complete failure as an officer and a leader. And he was just really, and I'm like, yeah, you yelled at a fellow officer in the chow hall over his mustache length. He had chewed and I'm like, you couldn't just take him, and in a chow hall full of mostly enlisted folks, you embarrassed a fellow officer. I'm like, you couldn't just take him aside and go, hey man, that mustache is a little crazy. You might want to think about trim. There's no reason to be a jerk. And some guys were jerks. And then you have the E8, E9 guys they're like trapdoor spiders lurking to grab some poor kid who's not in regs or something. And that used to just drive me nuts. I just, that was one of the things that for me, and one of the things that I had one incident that really made me realize the Air Force is a crazy organization. Like we would deploy so often that we would have the same wing commander on multiple deployments, but they still want us to go to the right start brief, right? And despite our best efforts to get out of it, we would have to go. So I remember sitting there and the right start, and the general goes, who's deployed for their first time?
And just to make
for some reason,
that right start brief is one of those type briefings that doesn't need to happen.
Exactly.
But it's one of those things that follows when everyone shows up and someone doesn't have enough time or they're not focused on the mission.
But he goes, who's their first deployment? So you get your bevy of young kids on their first deployment, but about 6 E9s, and I remember 2 or 3 06s raise their hand. And I'm like, how do you get to senior rank and have never deployed? And we've been at war for almost a decade now. This is late. This is, I think, 2008. And I'm just like, how is this possible? And then that's when I realized, but those are the people that are going to come over there and they're going to be, why aren't you wearing your reflective belt? I mean, they wanted us to wear reflective belts all the time so that when we scrambled, they were like, just take them off before you get in the aircraft. I remember telling my commander, I said, sir, on the offhand chance that I get killed and Al-Qaeda's filming my body as they steal my watch, right? I don't want to be seen in a reflective belt. Like,
right. I don't want to be shamed in that.
Right. I mean, my family can deal with them stealing my G-Shock, but I don't want my kids to see their dad having a, and I mean, I was half joking, half serious, and it was just, so the mission focus, and there is a difference and unfortunately, I think this is a little magnified in the Air Force because I'm curious to get your thoughts. I think in the aggregate, if 15% of the total Air Force has the potential or will ever hear a shot fired in anger, I think I'm being generous.
Yeah, I
What
would
do you
agree
think?
with that. I think that's probably, I would say,
So you have,
very generous.
I mean, I don't know. I had arguments with guys about emergency leave. Like, hey, I got to get this guy out. Well, the guy who does that, it's his day off today. We don't want to. I'm like, I don't care.
Exactly.
Go get it. And I'm like, so there's a mindset between they're not like you said, they're not getting the buy-in from some of those other organizations to really understand what they're there to support. And it would get silly with karaoke. And look, I love the green bean as much as the next guy, right? But I mean, they got karaoke night, and it's like, okay, great, but they're out there. There's the war going on, or I got yelled at for using foul language by a lieutenant colonel, and I'm like, sir, and I am a potty mouth. I'm being nice here because, but I mean, my nickname, my one Charlie used to call me Major Potty Mouth. But
I think we did well on our last deployment because it was so small.
yeah,
What we do is we'd host on every Saturday. We'd have two pilots go. Anyone on base, again, it's a small base, could go and they could watch our tapes. So we would cut a bunch of the footage from that week. And we'd have the pilots go talk through, hey, dude, this was like 12 ISIS dudes. They were firing here, da da da. And then they got smoked with two 500-pounders. But they would go through that, right? And then you could give them like, hey, by you standing there and keeping the mess hall open for an extra hour allowed these guys to eat or whatever it might be. But you saw everyone there had buy-in. And when you get like, when you,
that's brilliant, man. That's a brilliant idea, and I wish more units would have done that. I just think it gets so big, like Balad was like huge. It's like an international airport, and I mean, who knows how many organizations there were there, and it became silly, but you got people who are never going to see it from the perspective you're going to see it, and your perspective becomes, why are you worried about a reflective bell, or
right.
guys tucking their PT gear in? Like, give a guy a chance to get out of his vehicle before you yell at him about tucking his shirt in, things like that. You just see nonsense. And so I just made it my job to protect my guys. I would say crazy things like, if you see someone with a Pedro patch or a Jolly patch, you're not allowed to talk to them. I would just say outrageous stuff. And my boss, God bless him, he covered his ass by going, he's passed over. What do you want me to do? Like, I can't send him home,
I need them.
So,
It's a good spot to be in because you can be the protector.
yeah.
I guess the other funny story I have is from Shaw. So I show up to Shaw. There's 3 fighter squadrons. The F-16 is not a quiet plane. I go to get my annual dental exam and I'm getting clean, and the dentist is in there and she's asking me what I do. I'm in my flight suit. Meanwhile, you can just hear the jets taking off for the go. And it's deafening, right? Even the dental clinic, which is like 2 mile or a mile away from the flight line. And you're like, well, I fly. And she's like, well, what do you fly? I'm like, F-16s. Where are those at? I'm like, they're here. That's what I do. You're just like, there's only so much you can do,
Rain, I have had, I know you're not going to believe me. Right hand to God, on 2 occasions, I've had Air Force 06 pilots go to me. The Air Force has helicopters. Like we used to, they'd be like, you guys are Army pilots, right? We'd be like, no, we're Air Force pilots.
It doesn't surprise me. It doesn't surprise me, which it should, but I believe it wholeheartedly.
I mean, no, I'm being like, when I first got in the Air Force, I did a dog and pony show at Nellis. Some full bird C5 guys like, we have helicopters.
That was my frustration, right? It's the Air Force. What is the mission? And there are obviously some other aspects of it, whether it be special operations, combat controllers, PJs, JTACs that are they're mission oriented people and they're doing the mission, whatever that might be. And again, you have to know where you fit. Like sometimes you're a support asset. As a fighter pilot, you're a support asset at times. Sometimes you're the tip of the spear and you're slinging AMRAMs to go kick the door down. Other times you're making sure people can get into and out of where they need to go safely. And you have to know where you fit in that. And I think it's easy. The focus is easily lost. We go down the rabbit hole of this, and it's obviously the discussion many a time at the squadron bar. The Air Force could do itself a favor every now and then by
I
tweaking it.
used to get I used to get in some good arguments with a couple of my academy buddies, and on doctrine, and I'd be like, listen, because they'd be like, the Air Force can win wars. I'm like, no, the Air Force can facilitate when. And again, I said, and again, this is from my Marine Corps background. I said, wars involve acquiring real estate, and the real estate will always be acquired by a 19-year-old with a rifle. And your job at the end of the day is to make it so that 19-year-old with a rifle can acquire that real estate in the safest, least dangerous way possible. And that's what we're here to do. And we can strategically affect that by diminishing the enemy's capabilities, be it whatever that capability is. That's sort of my philosophy. Now, I got in some good arguments, guys who fell into the Billy Mitchell, but it's interesting. Like, I believe everything is built around supporting Private Schmuckatelli as he goes about the country's business of, gaining that real estate or going out and finding bad guys and shooting them in the face,
Yep.
in the case of the bearded guys, I think that's what we do. And, that's my philosophy on that.
No doubt. I would agree. So real quick before we wrap up here, you've retired. What are you doing today?
Okay, so I retired. I didn't want to get a real job. I've had a couple of real jobs. I never really liked them. So I've been flying EMS on and off since I retired. It's a great job. I work a 14 on, 14 off schedule. We work 12-hour shifts. So I have 2 weeks off a month, which allows me time to spend time with my grandkids and stuff. And I've always been, as far back as I can remember, a movie buff guy. Like, I used to go to movies as a kid, double features, triple features, me and my friends, my brother and I'll even go alone if I need to see a movie. And I've always been interested in acting. And it was something I was interested in, but flying was really my love, So when I retired, I just decided, hey man, give it a shot. The great thing about our experiences is one in aviation in general, you learn life can be short. And two, add war to that. You're like, well, we only got one shot at this thing. Let's do what we want to do. So I decided to pursue some acting, and I got really lucky. Started taking some classes, joined an organization called Veterans in Media and Entertainment, which is basically a networking group for veterans in all aspect of the entertainment industry. And they work with some casting folks in New Amsterdam. That medical show on NBC was looking for some veterans. I sent in a tape. They liked it. I got to be a guest star on it. If you're ever interested in watching it, Hulu, season 2, episode 7, you'll see my ugly mug within the first 10 minutes of the show. And I've been pursuing that ever since. I like it. COVID came along and kind of slowed things down. Now I just got a manager and we're working on an agent, and we'll see what happens, and then, as I mentioned earlier, unfortunately, I got a little kick in the, no pun intended, in the Jimmy with this prostate thing, and got me doing a little research. Rain, it's I think the rate among pilots is like twice the normal population for
So those listen, we were talking before we started recording. You found you had prostate cancer, and what led to that was doing this job. I realized really fortunate to be able to do it in the first place. And the guys who make it all the way to their retirement flying aircraft are really blessed and fortunate because
I mean, it looks, again, as I mentioned earlier, the outlook for me is pretty solid, and I should get back to the cockpit, but in the course of doing research, I realized, especially in the, in military aviation, it's just a little more of an issue. But honestly, I'm not that surprised that I got it. I'm not, woe is me, because around aviation, you're just around toxic stuff all the time. And then for me, so I'm about 2.5 years cumulative time downrange, a little more maybe,
Okay.
all at places that had burn pits.
Yep.
And then I spent 5 months cumulatively at K2, and we all know what was going on there. So I'm really not surprised. I just hoped it would happen later in life where it wouldn't matter. I was hoping it
How old are
would
you?
happen. I'm sorry,
How old are you right now?
59.
Yeah.
So I just hoped it would happen a little bit later, but I'm not, because aviation's pretty toxic. The materials and the fuels and the chemicals involved in servicing the systems, the oils, the lubricants. So, and unfortunately, the internet's a good and bad thing. But I just started researching it, and I just found out when I started looking. I started just Googling prostate cancer pilots, and it was like, whoa. And I'm like, really? I didn't know that we had it at more of a little more numbers than the average population. So that got me but it makes sense when you think about it. But like I said, I'm very lucky. I'm an optimistic guy. They said it's early, so we'll do the treatment. Some of the after effects of the treatment aren't the most, the first few months after will probably suck a little bit, but I guess it's better than the alternative. I'm still wrapping my head around. It's pretty new, so I'm still kind of wrapping my head around it because you don't have any symptoms. I don't feel bad. I just normal PSA testing. And they're like, yeah, 2 rounds of testing. They're like, yeah, we better take a biopsy. And they're like, yeah, it sucks to be you. So,
Is that just
but I feel fine. I'm working out.
was that part of a routine physical they caught it? I know you said PSA testing, but
yeah. If you're over 50, well, I don't know. Everybody's different. I'm far from an expert, but you get to be 50-ish, they start doing PSA testing. And then once it's above a certain thing, they start keeping an eye on it. And if you get 2 tests that are a little high, they'll have you get a biopsy, which is a pretty easy, but not the most pleasant procedure, but it's pretty easy. And then that's where it comes back and they tell you, I mean, I guess my little PSA before we wrapped up is if you're over 45, get your PSA tested, catch it early. If you catch it early, according to everybody, you're golden. So I just recommend, the beauty of being retired military is I always would go for a yearly physical just to get all my numbers. I work out pretty hard. So I'm kind of try to keep on breast of my numbers, cholesterol, and that's another thing. Like my schedule as my surgery schedule for the end of April. So between now and then, I'm just going to train as hard as I can. So I'm in the best shape I can going into it so that my recovery is, I asked this, my surgeon thinks I'm an idiot because I'm like, well, when can I get back to flying and when can I go back to the gym? He's like, that's what you're concerned about? I'm like, you said once you get it out, I'm good. He goes, you are, but most people are worried about, I'm like, I just want to know when I go back to flying and when I go back to the gym.
Yeah.
He's like, he's like, he probably just like, this guy's a moron. But those were the first 2 questions I asked him. I said, I got a bunch of questions, but the first one is, have you ever worked with pilots? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, well, I'm going to need some specific stuff. Will you be able to do that for me? He's like, yeah. And I said, well, how soon can I go back to the gym? And he's like, really? But yeah.
Yeah, probably not what most people are asking or worried about, I love that mentality.
Man, what can you do? I don't know. Like, I don't think I'm a particular, what can you do? Like, it is what it is. Life, man, I hate to get philosophical, but it just is what it is. You're going to curl up in a ball in the corner and go, why me? Or you just go, okay, I'll deal with it. What do we do? And then just deal with it.
It's proverbial. You're dealing with the hand you got dealt, and you either deal with it or you don't. I mean, it's pretty simple when it comes down to it. Some people get it.
Yeah, we've seen it. And I mean, again, cliche, but I credit my experiences in the military, being able to compartmentalize, being able to, aviation teach, that's a crazy word, but compartmentalization has helped me a lot in life, being able to focus and go, okay, well, this is going on. I get it. But right now I got a 1/4 mile viz and, and I know there's mountains around here. So let me worry about getting through this supposed pass through these hills that are that's on this map that I can't really see.
The closest alligator to the boat. Kill that one first,
Yeah, yeah, man.
Well, Yogi, we'll keep you in our prayers. I really appreciate you taking the time today to join me on the podcast. I'm glad we could finally make it happen. Still kind of boggles my mind. March 3rd, 2002.
Yeah, I didn't realize that till we talked about it. Hey man, it's an honor and a privilege. I mean, I'm glad to be on the podcast. I listen to it. I like it. Man, I love that you're getting people in the military aviation. I mean, you know, keep me informed of like the feedback. Like because I listen to these podcasts and I like you said, I just want to know what people think about them. Like how many people who listen are completely non-associated with aviation or military aviation and just what they think. Because I've listened to yours. Brian's pretty cool podcast. I listened to Jello. I spoke with Jello. There's another guy, Mitch, who's been doing Facebook stuff, former Marine. I mean, just I love all that stuff, and because people ask me all the time about what I did, and it's kind of hard to explain, and so to hear about it,
it's tough to explain it in just a few minutes, right? To encapsulate in a whole career, it's tough to do it in an hour and a half. Like you can't do it.
No, it's great, man. I like you got all your squadron poster stuff back there. I gotta get some of their stuff, man. I've been really watching their stuff. I just got to
they do
set my place up.
Yeah,
Yeah,
work. I like it. Again, it's kind of just a way to capture the memories of where you were back in the day.
Yeah.
So it's good.
Yeah, man.
Yogi, I do want to again say thanks for taking the time to do this.
No, man. Thank you, man. I'm glad we got together, and I really like what you're doing. Not saying that to blow smoke up your ass. I mean, I really enjoy it. I just love podcasts. I love, just love hearing guys coming from the same background as I do on radio, and just it's really cool, man. And thank you for having me. I hope my story's interesting to some folks, man. Like I said, I've had a interesting and highly undistinguished military career, but it was fun, man. It was a lot of fun.